In this section of the video you will learn about supply. The law of supply states that a quantity of a well-known, well-defined good that firms are willing and able to offer during a period of time increases as the price increases, everything else being constant. Let's look at some of the details about the law of supply. First off, the law of supply emphasizes the idea that we are dealing with a standardized or homogeneous product. The part of the law of supply means that firms selling the good are selling a good whose characteristics do not differ from producer to producer. Fresh vegetables and fruit, meat, milk are examples of a standardized or homogeneous product because the quality and taste does not differ too radically from producer to producer. Second, the firm must want to sell the good. Just because a firm has possession of a good does not mean that they are required to sell it. Indeed, firms may not put something on the market until the price reaches a place where they are willing to sell it. However, if the firm does not want to sell a good, it means that the good is not part of the supply of that good. Third, the firm must be able to sell the good. If the firm does not have the right to sell the good, then they cannot sell it. For example, if the firm doesn't have the cabbage to sell, it can't sell the cabbage. Fourth, all other variables are assumed to be held constant. The variables that are held constant are price of resources, technology and productivity, expectations about the future, the number of sellers or producers, exchange rate. There are two key concepts related to supply. First, supply is the amount of a good that an individual is willing and able to supply at every possible place in a given period of time. Second, the quantity supplied is the amount of good that an individual is willing and able to supply at a particular price. While these two concepts sound pretty much the same, they are in fact different. Supply has many prices and many quantities associated with it. The quantity supplied is a single amount of a good at a particular price. The difference will become maybe a little clearer as we work through an example. A supply schedule is a table of all the different combinations of prices and quantities of a good associated with each other. Let's look at an example of this by considering an example of a supplier of meat. Our individual wishes to earn as much money as he can to support himself, and he has a stock of meat that he's willing to sell. Notice that he meets the criteria set down by the definition of supplier. He is both willing to sell the meat and he has access to meat to sell. The first step is to construct a table similar to the one in the slide. The first column of our table is labeled with the price of meat per pound. The second column is the quantity of meat in pounds that individual supplies at a particular price. If the price of meat is $1 per pound, then the individual is willing to supply 5 pounds of meat. If the price of meat is $2 per pound, then the individual is willing to supply 11 pounds of meat. If the price of meat is $3 per pound, then the individual is willing to supply 18 pounds of meat. If the meat is $4 per pound, then the individual is willing to supply 25 pounds of meat. If the price of meat is $5 per pound, then the individual is willing to supply 30 pounds of meat. Notice that as the price increases, the amount of the good is also supplied also increases. Economists have a fancy way of describing this relationship. They refer to it as a positive relationship. The term positive relationship means that as one variable, in this case price, increases, the other variable increases as well, in this case the amount of meat. Another thing to understand about this table is the idea that each set of price and quantity is called a quantity supplied. If an economist would be looking at the second row from the top of the table, the one highlighted, he would say at the price of $4, the quantity supplied is 11 pounds of meat. We can take the table in the previous slide and convert it into a graph. A graph of a supply schedule is called a supply curve. A supply curve is found by graphing prices of the good with their corresponding quantities. Graphs of the supply curves are always laid out in the same way. The x-axis, the horizontal axis, or the back and forth axis, always represents the quantity of good. It is important to remember that as you move from left to right, the quantity of the good increases or gets larger. The y-axis, the vertical axis, or the up and down axis always represents the price of the good. It is important to remember that as you move from the bottom upward, the price increases. The next step is to graph the combinations of prices and quantities on the table. If the price of meat is $1 per pound and the individual is able to supply 5 pounds of meat, we're going to put a dot there. If the price of meat is $2 a pound, then the individual is able to supply 11 pounds of meat. If the price of meat is $3, then the individual is able to supply 18 pounds of meat. If the price is $4 per pound, then the individual is able to supply 25 pounds of meat. If the price is $5 per pound, then the individual is able to supply 30 pounds of meat. Now if we draw a line connecting all the points, a supply curve is formed. A supply curve is a graphical representation of a firm supply of a good. Notice that as the curve slopes upward, the price increases. Once again, economists would refer to this relationship as a positive or direct relationship. Each of the points on the supply curve represents the quantity supplied. So the point pointed to by the arrow is the quantity supplied. In this case, the quantity supplied is 18 pounds. Here's another example of a supply schedule for books. Once again, the amount of books supplied at a particular price is the quantity supplied by the firm. In this case, the quantity supplied is at $2 is 20 books. Here's another example of supply curve. Like the previous example with meat, the supply curve slopes upward as the price increases and the quantity increases. Notice it too has a positive relationship. Perhaps the only difference is to note that this supply curve is a straight line. Even though it is a straight line, economists still refer to it as a curve. The key thing to remember is that whether the supply curve is straight or a real curve, the economic analysis will be the same. Like the example with the meat, each of the points on the line represents the quantity supplied. In the graph on the slide, the quantity supplied is $2 when the firm supplies 20 books. A market supply schedule is really just the sum of all the supply schedules of a firm that a firm is willing to offer a good for sale. For example, Muller's Books is willing to offer 10 books, and Dravena's Books is willing to offer 5 books at $1. At $1, McDonald's Books is willing to offer 15 books. The market supply of books is the sum of all three of these. That is Muller's 10, Andrea's 5, and McDonald's 15, giving a total of 30 books at $1. We could repeat this for the rest of the prices, summing up each of the individual firms' offers of books. The green line represents the market, which is really the sum of Muller, Andrea, and McDonald's bookstores. Finally, sometimes you'll see, particularly in macroeconomic courses, a supply curve which is perfectly vertical. The vertical curve represents a situation where there is a fixed amount of the good. Notice that the price of the good may vary, but the amount of good is fixed. In the graph picture, the number of original Ford Model Ts, the original car built by Ford Motor Company, is fixed because Ford does not produce any more of them. The price paid by the car collector is not fixed and can vary up and down the supply curve. In this video, you learned the law of supply, which states that the quantity of a well-defined good that firms are willing and able to offer during a period of time increases as the price increases, everything else being constant. The supply is the amount of goods that firms are willing and able to offer at every possible price during a given time period. In this video, you also learn that the quantity supplied is the amount of a good that firms are willing and able to offer at a particular price. A supply schedule is a table listing the prices and their associated quantities that the firm is willing to offer for sale. A supply curve is a line representing the prices and quantities on a graph. The market supply is the sum of individual supply schedules. The market supply curve is the sum of individual supply